All right, so welcome back. We're going to start off right here by laying out for mortises. These are the 4 posts for the bed. Everything's been pre-milled before I started the video, so you didn't see any of the milling process. But these are laminated up out of 6/4 material. It's all Riffs-on oak. So I use my marking gauge to mark out all the mortises, and I like to do that for reference when I cut them on the Oliver mortiser. It just kind of helps me know that I'm in the right spot. So I'm using a 1/2 inch chisel bit here. These are 1/2 inch mortises, and they're going about 2 inches deep. I need big, beefy joints for this bed, especially on the footboard, just to give it the strength it needs. And they're pretty wide mortises as well, because it's a 7-inch rail there on the footboard. So when I cut these mortises, I'll leave little spaces, as you can see, and then come back and clear out that thin bit of material. I found that to be the best technique on the mortisers. I still kind of learning this machine as I go. So there is a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mortises that I'm going to cut for the footboard and for the headboard. 2 of those are not getting cut on the mortiser. They are getting cut with a plunge router because they are actually 1 inch wide. They're big mortises. There's no shoulder on the tenon, so I need the mortise to be pretty big. So I just set my plunge router. I've got a 1/2 inch spiral upcut bit that it will cut a total of 2.5 deep. I'm only going 2 inches deep, same as the others here. But I'll cut one side, flip it over with my fence, and cut from the other side. And then it leaves a little sliver of waste to get out. So I'm actually probably a little bit bigger than an inch here. I think that headboard panel, this will make sense as you get further in the video, but I think that headboard panel is about 1.1 inches. And since there's no shoulder, we're putting the whole panel into this mortise. So once I get all the waste cleared out, I can come back with a chisel and square off the corners and clean up the ends. All right, and there's a look at what we got. The 2 bottom mortises and then that top 1 inch wide mortise. I was wrong earlier when I said, I forget how many I said, but there's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mortises for the footboard and headboard. So now with all those, I've cut all the mortises that are going to require glue ups. Now I'm going to cut the mortises for the side aprons of the bed, which are detachable. So these are just simple alignment holes when I put the bed together that will hold the apron or the rail onto the footboard or headboard. These are 3/4 inch deep, a 1/2 inch bit again, and yeah, I'll cut 2 of them. One of them will be 1.5 inches, and the other one will be 2.5 inches, and that way the top one will fit tight at 1.5 inches, and the bottom one will be 1.5 inch tenon going into that 2.5 mortise, and it gives room for that apron to kind of move and float with the seasons. It doesn't lock it in place. If that makes sense, it should whenever I put it all together. So with those cut, I now need to drill holes for my bed bolts. I use bed bolts to build all my beds. It's really, really a great way to do it. It's super strong and not very difficult to do. So the first step is to drill a 7/8 hole with my Forstner bit, and that will hold the head of the bolt. And then I come back with a 7/16 hole right here using a rad point bit, and that is the diameter of that bolt is 3/8. So 7/16 gives me a little wiggle room to work with when I install the bed. And I find that helps out. So I drill most of the way through, let the point go, and flip it over and come back and drill the other way. And now it kind of makes sense. You've got the two alignment holes and then your bed bolt going right through the middle. So here you can see how that bolt drops in, and then you've got a nut that we're going to put into the apron here next, or to the rail, and that'll pull the whole bed together. So you might notice too, if you watch both videos, the public video and then y'all's video, this is actually quite a bit longer. You see a lot more of the footage in these videos. This part was not in the actual video I posted that went live, but this is me cutting the exact same matching mortises into the apron or the rail of the bed. And I just lay it on the post and line it up that way and get my layout lines. And then transfer those over to all four ends. And then we'll cut those the exact same way with the plunge router. It's always a little sketchy cutting these because you got to climb up on your bench and kind of stand and hold the router up at head level. But if you just take it slow and don't take too heavy of a cut, so those cut spiral bits will actually cut into end grain fairly easily. So it's pretty easy to control as long as you're not taking too heavy of a cut. So I cut those two matching holes, and then now I'll work on cutting out the section for the bolt and nut. And I just pre-lay everything out on one piece, set my fence on my router, and then do all four ends with the setting. And the way you see it here in the video is kind of confusing, but this is the first cut I'm cutting is to hold the bolt, and then the second cut you're about to see is actually to hold the nut. The way I edited it together is a little confusing, so hopefully that clarifies it. This is the one that holds the nut in place. So I've actually switched the settings for this. I've done these a number of different ways, and I've found that this way is not only the fastest, but also the best way in terms of assembling the bed with ease of assembly. I've done it in ways where it was way too complicated. And this is pretty simple to do. The only part that I think is kind of time consuming is right here where you have to chisel out this little hole here to hold the nut so you can square out the ends. You could technically cut that longer so that the nut could drop in there, but I like to make a nice clean hole that fits the nut perfectly so it doesn't move much. It drops in there nicely. I do typically have to do a little, I can use my disc sander and shave a little bit off of that nut to make it fit, but you can see how effective that is. It works really well. Okay, so the last thing to do on these aprons or rails is to glue in the little floating tenons. That will align it into the post. Just glue those in with some Titebond 2, and then once that glue dries, I scrape it off and clean it with a card scraper and a rag. That's pretty good. You don't want to leave that glue because then it won't shoulder up. But once it all dries, I'll take some sandpaper and round over the edges real well, and actually sand them down a little bit so they're not a super tight fit. It makes it easier to put the bed together. So with all that done, I can now turn my attention to the headboard, which I've already obviously glued up, and then I have this jig I made on my X-Carve CNC that lays out the two tenons in the profile, and I just clamp it on and use a flush trimming bit with a bearing on top to follow the pattern. Cut about 1/2 inch deep, 3/8 deep, and then come back with my saw and just saw the profile out. I was getting a little tricky here with my shots and hit a stick that my camera was resting on. And then this one I cut it, but I tagged the camera with that. It was pretty stupid. But I thought it'd be kind of funny. Hopefully, I'm glad the camera survived. It didn't break the camera. So once I get that cutout done, I need to cut a shoulder on the bottom tenon. So this is a 1/2 inch mortise it's going into, so I need to make it a 1/2 inch tenon. And I'm cutting the shoulder on the back side. So I just basically make a saw curve on where I want my shoulder and then come back with my 1-inch chisel, and I can just split those wood fibers out. It's a pretty fast technique for doing this. The other option would be getting it up on the table saw and trying to cut it with a dado blade, dado stack, but this is really pretty quick and effective way to do this. Once I split it, I can actually come back. I've laid it out. You can see my mark lines. I've used a marking gauge. I don't think I showed that in the video, but it helps because I can come back across the grain with my chisel and work down to that marking gauge line. The grain was being a little tricky here, so I kind of gave up on that route. I split as much waste as I could, and then, like I said, if you go across the grain, you don't deal with the splitting of the wood. You're taking advantage of the weakness of the wood fibers, and it cuts pretty cleanly and nicely, and you're not going to get any splits that aren't predictable. So I can get it fairly smooth and flat with a good sharp chisel, and I didn't show it, but I actually did use my Lee-Nielsen Rabbit block plane to kind of level it and dial it in. And you can tell when you look at this that the shiny part on the top tenon, I've hand planed that a little bit to dial it in and fit it. But it's a bit of a tight fit here, but it's going to work. So I want to go ahead and put a clamp on it and dry fit it all the way I want it, and then drill a hole in the bottom tenon. The reason I'm doing this is a lot like a breadboard end. I'm not going to glue that tenon into the mortise. I'm going to let it freely float because this is a 22-inch wide panel, and if you glued the top and the bottom, you would be locking it in, and it wouldn't be allowed to move with the seasonal movement. So what I do is just drill the hole, and then I disassemble the frame, and then I elongate the hole on my tenon, and then I'll pin it when I assemble it all, and that way that post can't move out, but it can. The panel can move up and down or horizontally, if that makes sense. And to elongate that hole, I just set a fence on my router and get a 3/8 spiral up cut bit, and just line it up and make the cut. It's a fairly easy thing to do. This project I use the plunge router a lot on. It's really a handy tool. You can do a lot with a plunge router. Okay, so there's Mare hanging out. He looks like he's not having a good time. So this also I did not show in the main video, but this is me cutting the tenons for the footboard. This is the actual footboard rail here. It's a big wide piece, and I just use the dado stack and hog off that waste and cut the tenon with that. It is a 1-inch shoulder on the top and bottom, which is quite a lot. Again, I set the stop on my fence, so I'm always registering off the fence stop, and then I can make my initial cut on the shoulder and then just move it away from the fence and take out waste. Quick test fit, and you'll notice when you look at this that tenon is going to drop all the way down where that hole is for the bed bolt. After I assemble and glue this up, I'll drill those holes back out and just drill through the tenon. It feels a little tight in the video. It seems tight, but it's really a good fit. It's such a heavy piece, it was hard to get lined up. So I actually built this bed in 2.5 days, which meant I put in about 13-hour work days. So this is probably 7:30 at night in the evening where I'm starting to get worn out, and you might be able to tell. And I hope the video does not suffer from that. But I was tired at this point. But This is me cutting the tapers on the post using my bandsaw, and the bandsaw was not working well for this video. It needs, if you let the blades get dull on it, this saw just does not perform well. It needs premium sharp blades, and so the blade here was just kind of drifting, and it popped out of the taper before I wanted to. It was driving me crazy, but I managed to make it work, and I had to. But that taper actually goes down quite a bit further than where the blade just came out. So I'll cut 2 tapers on both sides. There's, it's 4-way taper. So I'll cut the 2. I took it to my joiner to clean off the saw marks and kind of dial it in. This is a technique you want to be very careful with because it is easy to, you can make a mistake. I had my fence all the way forward, so my wood is covering the entire cutter blade. And you just have to be careful not to run your hand over the blade. Just take your time and go slow and take light passes. Because you can also mess the taper up if you're not careful. So once I get done with the joiner, I can come back with my hand plane. And when you have a taper, you really can hand plane the grain real easily because you're taking advantage of how the taper cuts through the grain. So there's no tear out. It planes pretty effortlessly. But it was a lot of work planing, 16 sides basically, 4 posts. And another great thing you can do with the plane is you can kind of tweak how you do the taper. If you're getting a little out of square or something like that, the plane can make those adjustments. So once I had them all tapered, I came back with a 45-degree chamfer bit and cut a nice chamfer on all 4 edges of just the taper. This is kind of a traditional shaker look in doing this, especially where you see that chamfer start. It kind of scoops out and makes a little cove. I like that look. It's kind of what I was going for. You can also see there's a hole in the top of the post. That is going to be for a dowel that will accept a frame at the top of the bed. I pre-drilled those obviously before I tapered so I could center them. Also, I spent a lot of time sanding. None of that's shown in this video. There was hours in sanding these posts and cleaning up the router cuts and everything. But you obviously don't see that because sanding's not that exciting, so I don't really show that in the videos. So once the tapers were done, I could assemble this bed, and surprisingly it went together pretty easily. Like I said, I put, this is a bottom, I guess you could call bottom apron below the headboard, just creates some more structure and strength, and it gives a point for the mattress to rest on. That top tenon on the headboard is glued, as you can tell, and then the bottom ones are left unglued like I spoke of earlier, and I'll pin those in. It was a lot of work doing this on my own, and at this point it was probably 10:30 at night, and I'd started pretty early in the morning, so I was super tired. Okay, so coming in the next day, the bed, I basically took the footboard and headboard out of the clamps, did a little cleanup, a little sanding, got the glue off, and then assembled the bed. And this kind of gives you an idea of how it goes together. It's tricky to do on your own. I had to get these little blocks and shim it up, and it kind of helped. Made it a little easier. Mayor's gonna bail right here. He doesn't like what he sees. So it's just a matter of basically aligning up those pins and then using a little mallet, and you can hammer it most of the way flush, as you can see, and then you just drop the nut in, get the bolt in there, and tighten it down. I mean, it's really easy, and it's amazing. I'm always amazed at how strong bed bolts are. You'll see here in a second when I shake the bed some. I mean, it doesn't rack, and the joints don't move. It is solid. So I would highly recommend giving them a go. These bed bolts come from Horton Brasses. I'll put a link in the description. Those are the ones I use. They work great. They have a little tool they sell with them that helps you tighten because they're a square head. So with all the bed assembled, I'll work on that top frame. I've put 3/8 dowels in the top of the post. So here I'm drilling, correct that. I put 1/2-inch dowels in the top of the post, and here I'm drilling a 5/8 hole. I want to have a little bit bigger hole so that it fit, there's a wiggle room. I don't want it to fit tight because things just aren't going to line up. This gives me a little play to work with. So I've got 4 of these, and there'll be a hole on each end. So I do all those And as usual, you set your depth on your drill press so that the point of the brad point goes through the wood, and then you flip it over and come back and hit your hole. If you go through, you're just going to blow out the wood. So with the holes drilled, now these have to overlap at the corners on top of the post. So in order for that to do, we have to cut little rabbets for these to lap on each other. And I've set up the same way I do on my tenons. I set up a stop on my fence so I can just slide up to that stop, make my cut, and that cuts the first shoulder, and then just clear out the waist. And I'm cutting half of the material. So I think these were inch, so I'm cutting ½ inch off and leaving in a ½ inch rabbet. Got a plane flying over here. So yeah, with those cut, I mean they just drop right on. The two long ones on the two side ones go face down, and then the other ones drop right on top of them. Just checking the fit here to see how it goes. If you're not familiar with the material, this is quarter sawn, not quarter sawn, sorry about that. It is rift sawn with white oak. I made the whole bed out of about 75 to 80 board feet of rift sawn 6/4 white oak. So it's really one of my favorite materials. White oak on its own, flat sawn, I'm not a huge fan of, but the rift sawn and the quarter sawn I really like. And I'm just applying a General Finishes Armor Seal oil to it. It's real simple, real easy, and it just brings out the natural color of the wood. It's kind of pretty honey brown color. Since I was in such a rush to get this done, I actually only put one coat on and then took it in my house. And I'll have to put 2 or 3 more coats on while it's in the house. It was a bit of a bummer, but that's just kind of the way it worked out. So there it is. I got my dad here. He's helping me out. He retired recently, so he's been around a lot more to help me in the shop, which is awesome. I really appreciate that. He came over to help me put the bed together. The mattress fit, that's awesome. You can always be very grateful when that happens, because I have gotten things wrong. This mattress I thought was going to be 12 inches high. It actually turned out to only be 10 inches. So the bed is a pretty low bed at about 24 to 25 inches from the floor. So I appreciate you guys supporting the memberships. There's not a whole lot of y'all yet, but I hope it grows. I enjoy doing this. I hope you guys learn from it. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.